The horse community, mainly because I have the notes already prepped. I made a tweet about 2 months ago in March,
Okay.
and it was something about somebody was talking about like training horses. I think there was a video about like clicker training, and I don't even remember. Let me see if I can find that tweet real quick. If I remember correctly, it really wasn't anything like anti-clicker training.
No,
it was more like, hey, this is just why we don't do it. Like, I see a problem with it, and oh my goodness, like, did it just flip everybody out? Maybe I did say something that I just wasn't meaning, because that can always still happen too, unfortunately.
Yeah, punctuation's big.
Sure, yeah. We have issues with clicker training. They mostly learn to react to a specific incentive rather than bond with you and use their mind in tough spots. That's what I say.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, it's based on food, right? A lot of times, or reward.
Yeah.
But they respond to that instead of respond and then get a reward.
Yeah.
Because I have seen some clicker trainers that were doing demonstrations when I, like a massive, say, an expo where people are demonstrating their different philosophies.
Sure.
And guy had a clicker trained his horse, and his horse was moving away from him every time he'd get his reward, and he was using food with his clicker. Every time he did it, the horse would then leave and would not do anything for him until the guy went to the horse and again started the clicker stuff and got the reward. So the horse had him completely trained.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a wreck, and the horse would do some things, and I've got no issue with clicker training. I mean, if you want to do that, but I see mainly when it's very up close and you're doing things on the ground where you're doing trick type or
trick type, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really
you're looking
good,
for a very specific movement and trying to incentivize
it's
that.
It's a very good system for that. Yeah. But as far as a training, say a clicker training to get a horse to stay calm or calm down, they're looking for that incentive. They're looking for that. For instance, feed. And a lot of people use feed, which I absolutely disagree with, except for two things. They come in and get caught
from the pasture.
Yeah, from the pasture, and then get rewarded. I'm not bringing them in, giving it to them, and then catching them. I want to catch them first, and then they get rewarded for it instead of it being the incentive to come in. The other part of that is using feed for teaching a horse to load in a trailer that is.
Oh yeah, it's incentive to pull them in.
Well, no. Again, I don't use that as incentive. I load them, and then once they're in, I will give them grain to occupy them. It's a reward after the fact, but then it also helps to have them calm down.
Sure.
It takes their mind off of this enclosed area, and but still, neither one of those are incentives. They are rewards after the fact. Okay. Where a lot of times the clicker training is the reward for doing what's requested.
Right. Yeah. So that was the tweet, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I got roasted. Like, okay,
it's all right.
But like the way people interacted with that tweet was just like so negative that I was kind of disappointed again in the horse community, because we've had this discussion before, especially on YouTube. Like, when people say something when it comes to horses, they oftentimes just hit with the negativity of like, you don't know what you're doing. Your mindset or your philosophy is completely wrong. Like, there's nothing about like, hey, I don't understand why you're doing this. Like, can we talk about this or have a discussion? Or I prefer to do this because of this reason. Why do you decide to do it that way? It's like, to an extent, it's almost like current politics, where they just like want to just pound on the other person.
Well, look, I've been training horses for over 50 years. And the one thing that I have learned early on when I was very young, and didn't really have any credibility because I was so young. Nobody would, like, he doesn't know what he's doing because he's young.
Yeah.
And then as I got a little better, and, even in high school, people were bringing me horses to train or to fix that would have problems. The one constant to that, once I became good enough that I had some kind of credibility, or that people thought, well, maybe he knows what he's doing. At that point, when you are somewhat of a threat to someone else's knowledge or their training base, or maybe can bruise their ego a little bit, and that's the problem with any kind of specialized behavioral type, because you can do one thing that is say metalwork, for instance. There's different ways to do it, but it's pretty similar. And there's better ways, but it's still similar. Where when you're doing behavioral training, there are all kinds of very wide differences in how you do it. And because of that, when somebody's successful at something, which is fine, then the ego kicks in. And one thing about it, even if you've never trained a horse, but you've ridden a horse or handled a horse, ego is enormous in the horse world. And so, I mean, it just is.
Do you think that's because it's a cultural thing? Because it's like the West? Because it's like,
yeah,
I'm more of a cowboy than you.
Partly.
I can handle cattle better than you, like
yep.
that type of thing.
I think it is. I think there's a lot to that. And everybody's got their own different way of doing it. But I can tell you this, I've never trained any two horses exactly the same way.
Sure.
I've listened to the horse and responded to what they needed to be trained, and sometimes very similar in a lot of cases, but not always exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I haven't looked at other people, seen what they're doing with something, and go, I might incorporate that.
Yeah. Well,
why not? If something works, why the hell not use it?
That was another thing I put in here too. Is like, we need to be more understanding of the various ways to like skin the cat. Mm-hmm. You know, like there's different ways to achieve the same goal.
Well, that's why I've never been a real fan of the, I call them pyramid scheme trainers.
Mm-hmm. The ones that like, cookie cutter, where you have to follow certain steps.
And you follow their steps, and then you have to pay for this, and you have to get certified in it. Otherwise, you're no good. It's like taking a shotgun to a target. You can blast at it, and there may be a good number of those BBs that hit the bullseye, but you're going to have some outliers there too that don't necessarily quite hit.
Sure.
The idea between training and, for me, and getting it a finished product is that you hit the middle of that bullseye every time, or with very little variation in how that horse performs.
Yeah.
And you do that not by following a specific recipe, and you can over time if you do that enough. But when you're training horses for someone for production, and you want to get that horse back to them, and they want to be able to use it, you need to be able to listen to that horse and see what that horse needs. And it isn't giving the horse what they want; it's seeing that miss in the behavior and the training that the horse isn't picking up, or you're not communicating with that. And so you have to change yourself and your approach to what they're doing, figure out why they need what they need, and then make that happen, make the change so that horse then understands. And all you're doing is not following a recipe, you're following the horse and making them better, to then go ahead and make that horse like it's the last one you did. The one that's fantastic, you do that and get to that same goal. Doesn't matter how you get there.
Well, I'd say there's probably like, to an extent, there is a recipe of like the overall concept of what to do, but you don't have to follow it like step by step.
No, that's right. Yeah. Well, and you know what? Really, anybody can train a horse if you've got enough time and enough patience.
What have you said? You're like, there's 3 types of trainers. I mean, everybody's a trainer. You're either going to make the horse worse than what it is, you're going to maintain where it's at, or you're going to make it better.
That's right. You're going to train it one of those 3 ways. Yeah.
Going back to, I got some bullet points. Going back to the what you call it, the statement that I made in Twitter. I kind of like, these were some of my initial thoughts.
Okay.
I was like, those who often claim to have other ideas that are often those that immediately attack and undercut you by name calling you, questioning abilities.
That's called insecurity.
Sure. Just because we overwhelm an argument with a comment after comment after comment doesn't mean you're right. It's the equivalent of like talking over someone.
And yelling louder makes it. Yeah, no, I agree.
Being snide and condescending does not help you, the argument, or your industry.
Again, you got some problems with a little bit of insecurity there.
Sure. You don't have to do things a certain way. We just talked about that. Like, your horse must lunge. You must use very specific equipment. Must follow a certain process, cookie cutter process.
Okay, and I'll sell you all of those accoutrements to make that happen.
Yeah. There are sub-communities: clicker trainers, gated people,
Oh, sure.
show people, endurance riders, discipline-centered.
Tons of different disciplines.
And just because you're within those different subcultures or disciplines doesn't mean you're wrong, and doesn't necessarily mean you're right either.
Well, and there's something to be said for that too. I'm not an inventor. I'm not a hunter jumper type trainer. Certainly not dressage. I don't find a lot of value in reining in real life outside of how often does that happen? You know, does that have a value? It can.
Yeah, certain aspects.
I have done some cutting, but really, those are all specialized things that have value in each one of them. And you especially in the Europeans, you have a certain standard because there are people that train, and you have to follow their methods, and you have to be certified. And that's the crux of our country. There's no certifications unless you make your own business that way, where you certify people. And again, the cookie cutter, where in some ways the European training, you may have someone who's quite competent. However, that competency is within that system.
Yeah.
Different systems can overlap, and different systems can be completely different from one another, where you wouldn't necessarily use dressage on one of our pack horses.
Right.
What's the point?
Yeah, it doesn't fit the
or you wouldn't, and they wouldn't want one of our pack horses to do that. What's the point?
Yeah.
So you have to put that in a context of what is needed or what is best for what you want to do. You're certainly not going to take a little halflinger pony. We were talking about halflingers earlier. Today, you're not going to take a halflinger pony and make a hunter jumper out of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Might be a little impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in human terms as you're not going to make a marathon runner a heavy power lifter.
Yeah.
You know why? It's not suited for that. So the discipline and how to get to that is also wide and varied. So I've got a lot of respect for all of those disciplines. It doesn't mean I find them particularly useful for what we do. And we are not. I never claimed to be a trainer of everything. Be a little tough to do that. You could, if you live long enough and you train enough horses, you can do that. But again, if you spend enough time with your horse, then you're going to make that horse do really good things as long as you're disciplined yourself in the behavior that you want for them.
Now, the other parts that I had too were, because you have a different idea or approach, your skills and abilities are immediately discredited and questioned. Some go as far as to question your humanity, suggesting that you abuse animals. So versus, using, hey, you did something wrong, maybe a little bit of negative reinforcement, like, right, hey, you're going to run around the corral a little bit, versus not giving them food. That
you're not going to deprive them of food and water.
Yeah.
If you do, then I can buy that argument that if that's a training technique, then maybe that is a little bit over the top.
But I was thinking also along the lines of, like, it's different between giving them treats versus saying, "Hey, you did something wrong. Now you're going to work for it." Doing that, you know what I mean? Like that's not abusing a horse or something.
Look. Second point.
Another one. There you go. This is another point I thought. This is what keeps people away and drives them out from the equine industries, because we have these types of behaviors with people.
Yeah.
This attitude is also with separating those in agriculture from those in urban areas, because they see the infighting. At least from my perspective, I think they see infighting. They're like, why would I want to be in a community like this?
I don't know. Maybe there is. I kind of look at it that a lot of the urban folks don't see the minutia of the different cultures within
sure, yeah,
so I think it might be something that's more finely missed easily because you're not part of it.
Yeah. Now, I think we might hold on to that for a second, but somebody said also. So I made a comment about how you should really listen to the body language of your horse, licking, chewing, dropping the head, blinking, ears focused towards you, head looking at you,
muscle tightness.
All the
back line,
things, right?
Yeah, leg placement.
And they sent a article, which is right here, and it says, "Is licking and chewing a sign of submission in horses?" And ultimately, I'll give you cliff notes. Like, it's pretty quick and to the point. It's a decent article for the purpose that it's trying to provide, which is they found recently, as of early April of 2019, so 4 years ago, that licking and chewing is a stimulant from a stressor. And so it's not because they're licking and chewing, say, "Hey, I am submitting to you and I understand what you're trying to tell me, so I'm going to do it." It's I am stressed and this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. So to an argument, you can say, "Yep, I can see where that's coming," because as a baby, foals will start, chomping their mouth saying, "I'm a baby, leave me alone. I'm okay. Like, I'm not a threat. Like, please leave me alone."
Like that Colt did this morning.
Right. But at the same time, I was thinking about that too. It's like, you can see horses lick and chew when they're clearly not stressed in any negative manner whatsoever. Right. And so that argument, to the extent I would look at it, is it's also a positive stressor. So just because they may not like what's happening right now, you made them go around the corral a little bit because you're upset. They might be stressed a little bit and they're upset, but that's natural, because does a 3-year-old, does a 4-year-old like being disciplined for what they're doing? Not necessarily, but that's just because it's a negative stressor doesn't mean it's negative to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Well,
and I see Caitlin's point also was the barrel quarters versus packed and gated.
Absolutely.
It's a little different.
Absolutely. I mean, you're now starting to talk about slow and fast muscle twitch, conformation. All of those kinds of things fit into that. Just exactly my argument with the halflinger being a hunter jumper. But you got to look at what basic things happen in a body, whether it's human or horse or really any dogs. I mean, we live with dogs and cats.
Sure.
When a human is under a lot of stress and that stress kind of goes away, what do? What's a very common thing that happens? They yawn. Mm-hmm. It's a sigh. It's a very big response from your nervous system about the stressor. And some stress is good. There's eustress and there's distress. So we've all been kind of keyed into that. But when you're talking stressors, well, looking for that response is what you're wanting to do. You're very seldom are you putting a huge amount of eustress on a horse. You are when you're training, eventually, because they will learn to like that interaction, and they're doing things. And I mean, you see some horses, they love to be trained.
Yeah.
It's just they love it. The other part of that is some horses don't want to be trained.
Sure.
And the same thing, that stressor. So it's all about the context of it as well. So
yeah, I agree.
And I've used those keys on the physiology of that horse, what's going on in their mind at the time as you're training, to modulate and change or work harder or less on that horse.
Yeah. Now
it's all about pressure release, right?
Right. And that was another thing people are saying. There's a difference between positive. They kept saying R plus and R minus, and I was like, what are they talking about? And I finally realized it's negative and positive reinforcement is what they're trying to talk about.
Sure.
Which to me was a little condescending, because to an extent, if you don't know what that means, that's shorthand for something that's in that community.
Right.
Like, you're forcing somebody to try and come into the community and understand immediately what they mean. Like, that's not appropriate.
Well, it's not, but there's also, then you are at the bottom of the hierarchy too, and understand your place.
Yeah.
That's the unsaid thing.
Yeah.
There's a
so to me, I took that as kind of disrespectful is what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, egos are egos.
Sure.
There's a pretty well-known trainer that did the same thing with the selling of merchandise and selling of your competence, and was he's a good marketer.
Yeah.
But when you teach the people that you are getting money from, or they are your students, whether it be formal or through articles, or they're paying into to get more information at different some level, I guess, or a hierarchy of that, and you build what I call it, that cult mentality. And that is, and one of the things that this person said is, never ever pat your horse. people that pat their horses, they're stupid. They don't know what they're doing. Never pat your horse. Always just stroke your horse. Well,
to an extent, I understand why.
I start out stroking that horse. Yeah. Absolutely. If you just start patting that horse right off the bat, you're going to spook him away.
Yeah.
Because that is a fairly abrupt body language directly from you to them.
It's a little aggressive.
It is.
But that's like what I did with Bet today.
Right.
It's like I stroked him,
right.
Made sure he was okay, kind of soothed him, but then at the same time, like I pat him because like you need to get used to this because he tries to use that any excuse to get upset.
Right.
Like get over it. Like you're gonna accept this for what it is. And I was patting him on his chest, on his shoulder, and then I was like, okay, now I need to stroke him and reinforce that.
My whole response to that is, why wouldn't you pat your horse at some point? I want that horse to be able to accept anything I do to them.
Yeah.
And so you build this cult mentality of you only do what I tell you to do because you've paid for me to tell you this.
Yeah.
But they were actively going out and criticizing other people whenever they said them.
For a different opinion.
He told them to go and when they see that, to jump on these people and tell them, that's stupid. You don't know what you're doing. Why do that?
And that's not respectful.
Again, that's that cult mentality. We only do the right thing. So you're paying me to tell you what to do. I'm telling you to do this. And because I'm telling you this and you're paying me for it, you're in the club.
Yeah. No, Sarah, we're not talking about bomb-proofing horses. We're just talking about like the horse community in general. And so this kind of goes back to what I wanted to go to. I said something about clicker training on Twitter for the ranch. And so I had 5 bullets that kind of made me think about things again. I said, what started all the things was the comment about how we personally as a ranch and an organization disagree with the use of clicker training for training horses. And the reasons why I disagree are these 5 bullets. Like the first one,
training for our purposes.
Sure, yeah. But like the first was, it reinforces the idea that you always get rewarded. Like that shouldn't necessarily be the thing. Like you're not always going to get rewarded for doing the right thing, right? You're expected for it, but
it's also the pressure release. The release of the pressure
sometimes,
is a reward.
Yeah, exactly. The horse is doing things for a goodie rather than because there's an expectation. That was my second point. The third is it doesn't seem the horse always thinks through the problem. Rather, it just looks for the treat. That was your point too. I think you made a while ago. Was it was just looking for the food rather than actually figuring out the problem.
Right. Not Pavloving the horse. Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. And I would say the example for that was what happens if it stumbles into a ball of wire and you're not there with the treat readily available? Is it just going to freak you out or what?
Well, here's a good example of clicker training. And it wasn't clicker training per se, but it was the reward that was expected. Is my aunt had a little horse called Patches. And she wore shirts like I do, like I've got these pockets, and she would put treats in her pocket. And she was we'd call her busty woman. And my grandpa, was his sister, so it was my great aunt, said, that's not a good idea, feeding that horse those little bits of goodies. That horse is going to expect that, and it's going to cause you a problem. They're going to get more and more demanding about being fed. She wouldn't listen to him. So what happened? After time, she was always going out, and that horse knows where those goodies are at. Pull those out. She was out of goodies, had no more, and this horse was insistent that they have another treat. Reached up and bit and grabbed that pocket and completely just missed her breast and ripped that pocket right off of her shirt. So who taught who what? And how well did that work for whatever she wanted to do? That horse was there for her to feed it, nothing more.
Yeah.
And at that point, she realized she had a major problem on her house or on her hand.
Yeah, Sarah says, no, ma'am.
Yeah, exactly.
The fourth point that I had was you're not just seen as a part of the herd animal. Like what we try to talk about is like communicating with them and being like the dominant one. Mm-hmm. But not dominant in the sense that you're abusive or anything, but just
not dominating.
In the heart.
Yeah. Not domineering, but dominant.
Yeah. But in the hierarchy, you are in charge. And rather, you're just seen as a vending machine. And I put in there, studies suggest that it is not proven horses see you as a herd animal. My question is, are there studies that prove you are not seen as a herd animal?
Well, here's the thing. What is that horse? What have they grown up being? The only context they have is the herd.
Yeah.
And you're a part of that. They think on their terms. They don't think on
Sure.
yours. We teach them to think on our terms. That's what training is.
Yeah, and that's my point. Is like, you know, part of the whole Twitter thing. People were saying, well, it's not proven that you're part of the herd. Well, has there anything on the inverse, like that you're not part of the herd?
Right.
Like, and then the final part that
that's like asking somebody what it's like to be a twin.
Sure. Yeah,
they don't have any idea what it's not like to be a twin.
But the final point that I had was not using clicker training does not mean you don't provide treats, don't give any praise, don't release pressure, and you don't look out for the welfare of the animal.
Right.
Just because you don't do clicker training doesn't mean you're not there to make sure that the animal is at the optimal that it can be. Taking care of it, making sure it's safe, healthy, all those things.
Now there's some caveats to that, and if you want to use a click as a cue to do something, that's fine. I can do that with my mouth.
Sure.
I can ask that horse to go faster by clucking a little bit. We call it clicking, clucking, and asking that horse to move faster. But I'm reinforcing that. I'm teaching them that that's what that means. Good. But it isn't that they get something for that in the way of a treat or food. They get to do that, and when they do it, I praise them verbally. As for instance, if I'm riding and I want that horse to go faster, and I go, and they go, and then as they move into whatever gait I want them to go, whether it's a trot, lope, it doesn't matter. I praise them verbally. Good boy or good girl. So, click. Too many riders click at their horses for it to mean anything other than go or move. There you go. You have to be consistent. I don't care what cue you use. It matters zero.
Yeah.
It's that you have to be consistent with whatever you do, and you don't use it for something that you don't mean.